Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. We just want to make sure that everybody is able to get on. So we'll just give it another couple seconds. Looks like we have a number of people joining us today, so. All right. So why don't we get started? Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Nicole Jarvis. I am Assistant Director of Programs at Cancer and Careers. For those of you who are listening in from your phone, please just let us know by sending an email to cancerandcareers@cew.org with your name and the phone number that you'll be dialing in from. This way that we're able to confirm your attendance and just make sure that you receive all the relevant follow-up information after today's webinar. So if you are new to Cancer and Careers, we are a national nonprofit and the only program of its kind solely dedicated to empowering and educating people with cancer to thrive in their work environment. On here, you see a list of all of the free programs and services that we offer. We have a comprehensive website available in both English and Spanish, and that's really at the heart of everything that we do. On our website, you can find various support services, including our resume review service, as well as access to career coaches. Our educational blog and newsfeed are both rich resources where those who have been diagnosed, their caregivers, employers, and healthcare professionals can really stay current on topics that are related to work in cancer. We also have our free publication library, which is also available in English and Spanish. And this really provides tangible, easy to digest information on working and looking for work after a cancer diagnosis. We do have those available in both hard copy, which can be shipped, as well as PDF formats that can be downloaded. We also offer numerous events each year, from hour-long webinars like today to full-day events. So we will be back to tell you more about those at the end of today's presentation. Now, for those of you seeking continuing education credit, this slide lists all of the organizations who have accredited today's webinar, as well as the required steps for getting a certificate. This information is also available on our website. A link to the evaluation and post-test will be shared at the conclusion of the webinar, so please take the time to complete them at that point. If you are unable to complete those today, a follow-up email will be sent with the links tomorrow, Thursday, July 11th. And that should land in your inbox by 5 p.m. Eastern. Also, for those of you who are planning to request continuing education credits, our accrediting bodies require us to share this slide and let you know that there are no conflicts of interest to report. And as you may know, Zoom has a lot of great features that you can use in order to interact with today's event with us and other attendees. So there's the Q&A box. If you have any questions about today's content, please do so by clicking the Q&A box, which should be below. We do know the importance of privacy, so there is the option to submit your questions anonymously. And we'll do our best. I see that there was a question. If you're attending by phone, please just send us an email with your name and your phone number that you're dialing it from. So we will do our best to answer everyone's questions, but please be patient. And if we don't get to your question today, please send us an email at cancerandcareers@cew.org, and we'll do our best to get that information to you. You'll also see that there is a chat box, so you can feel free to use the chat box to communicate with our speakers, CAC staff, and other attendees. But please, just an important note is that the chat box is not private, so it will show your first and last name. So that's something just to be mindful of when and if you do decide to engage in the chats. And please don't put the Q&A questions in the chat box because we could miss your question. So all Q&A questions should go in the Q&A box. As far as AI assistance, please note that today's presentation is copyrighted. Therefore, the use of AI assistance and/or transcribing and recording devices of any kind by attendees is not allowed. Those found to be using AI or other recording transcription software during CAC's programming will be removed from the event and will be permitted to return without that recording or transcription software. Real-time closed captioning is available for today's event for those who need it, and a captioned recording of this webinar will be archived on our website following today's session. To request any additional reasonable accommodations for future events, please send us an email at cancerandcareers@cew.org at least 24 hours prior to the live session. Now, thanks in part to support from Genentech, P&G Beauty, and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Cancer and Careers is proud to offer this 10th year of the Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series, which was really created to provide anyone whose life has been touched by cancer with concise, targeted information about the work-related issues that arise after a diagnosis. Additionally, we'd like to recognize Cancer and Careers year-round sponsors who support all of our core programs and are really the reason that we are able to continue providing all of our resources and services free of charge. Now, today's session, Balancing Work and Cancer, will explore issues that sit at the very heart of the conversation about employment after diagnosis. What information does one need in order to make good decisions about work? What considerations are there when deciding whether or not to disclose at an existing job or during a job search? How do you manage side effects while working or address comments from coworkers? Over the next hour, Scott will be discussing all of these questions and more. So Scott will be leading today's webinar. Scott Sinclair is the Senior Manager of Programs here at Cancer and Careers. And following the presentation, there will be time for Q&A. So again, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box. Maite and I will be monitoring the chat box while Scott is presenting, but if there are questions you'd like answered during the Q&A, again, the Q&A box is where you should put them. So now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Scott to get us started.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you all for joining us today. So I would like to take a few moments as we begin to acknowledge the constantly shifting landscape and that not everyone watching today is going to be in the same place in your own cancer experience. Some of you may have just received a diagnosis, so you're at the beginning stages of the process. Some of you may have already made decisions about work in cancer, so are experts in your own rights. And others of you may be caregivers or healthcare professionals here on behalf of the people that you support. Today, I'm going to cover a wide range of topics and situations related to work and cancer. Not all of them are going to be relevant to you right now, but my hope is that you'll walk away with information so that it may be helpful soon after today, if not immediately today. So from here, let's jump right into the heart of the work and cancer conversation, and that is the diagnosis and work dilemma. Now, when deciding about working throughout treatment or soon after treatment, it can help to take a step back and look at the big picture. Think about the many, often competing pieces of information that you need to make a decision about work in light of your specific diagnosis, your specific work circumstances, and so on. And all of these unknowns can feel understandably overwhelming. This makes it important in moments like these to acknowledge the reality of what is going on, and from there, start to isolate and answer some specific questions in order to illuminate the best path forward. It's also important to recognize that sometimes these questions are naturally in conflict with one another, but acknowledging that conflict and making an informed decision with that in mind is critical. Now, two key questions that you can ask yourself are: how important is work to you personally? And what information do you actually need to make good decisions about work? And I do also want to acknowledge that even for those of you who may be past this initial moment of work-related decisions, it may still be helpful to think through the lens of these two questions and make sure that what you're doing is actually working for you, or keep these questions on hand as things change in the context of treatment and recovery. So once you ask yourself those two questions, there are often a number of other questions that naturally start to arise. And it's not uncommon to find that these questions aren't in alignment with one another, and that is okay. So it can be a good idea to take a step back and start to evaluate the individual parts within the bigger picture to figure out what's true for you. So for example, what are your financial and insurance needs? For some people, these are going to be key in driving decisions about whether or not to work during treatment. And for others, it's not going to be the case. So also ask yourself, how is your identity connected to your job? Maybe you're someone who loves what you do and you want to keep doing it because it's going to help you cope during treatment. Now, of course, that isn't going to be the case for everybody. So the point is here to have a sense of how identity and work intersect for you. And of course, no person is only their job and their diagnosis. So what might you want to consider in terms of your personal life? Do you have obligations to family or other loved ones that need to be prioritized? What do you think you might need in terms of managing stress or self-care? You may also find that as you ask yourself these questions, even more questions start to pop up that you might not know how to answer for yourself. And that is also okay. And we'll talk a lot more about that shortly. So gathering information is a very important step in the process that can help guide your active decision making. And to simplify the process a bit, we have broken down the types of information to gather into 3 categories, which you can see laid out here. They are medical and treatment information, work information, and legal information. Now, before we go any further, I want to make it very clear that I am not a lawyer. If you are interested in learning more about which federal and state workplace laws and protections may apply to you, I absolutely encourage you to reach out to a legal expert or a legal organization. But for the purposes of today's discussion, I do want to spend some time discussing one key law in order to provide a foundation for any additional fact-finding that may be necessary. And this law is the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. To start, the ADA is a federal law, meaning it applies to all 50 states. And the part that's relevant to work in cancer comes from Title I. And just like all laws, it has certain requirements that must be met to use it. Now, in broad strokes, they are: your employer must have a minimum of 15 employees for the law to apply to them. You, the person with the job, must have the necessary skills, certifications, etc. to do the job. And your disability must meet the criteria determined by the ADA. Now, if you meet all of these requirements, the ADA may provide protection from discrimination and may also provide access to reasonable accommodations, which we'll discuss later on in the presentation. And again, I'm not an attorney. This is just a quick overview so that you know the ADA is something to consider. And more information can be found by reaching out to a legal expert or using some of the links at the bottom of this slide. Now, it's also critically important to spend some time thinking about the kinds of decisions that you want to make related to disclosure, so you can make choices about sharing your story and what works best for you. These include making clear decisions about what gets shared in your personal life, where you may have people where you're completely open with, versus in your work life where you may be a little more closed off. And then there's a third area where disclosure may happen, and that has its own set of complexities and things to consider. And that's the online space. At CAC, we often hear from patients and survivors about the role that the internet is playing in helping them through their cancer experience. For many, it can create a sense of community and a way to feel better in that moment. But it also creates a written record of information that can be difficult to get rid of. And I want to make it clear that we are not saying never post anything online, since it can actually be a pretty good thing to have a presence. But rather think about what's important for everyone to have a solid understanding of the virtual landscape in order to make informed decisions and feel in control of how your story is being presented. And in part, this is because research indicates that more and more hiring managers, as well as existing employees, are Googling prospective candidates and their current employees, respectively. Now, this is not necessarily to find something negative. Rather, for hiring managers, it's often done to confirm things that they already like about a particular candidate. Or for current managers, it can be a way to get additional information about the people that they're currently working with. Still, it's possible that they'll come across a post on Facebook or Instagram containing information that the person might prefer that their employer didn't know. And so at this point, you may be asking yourself, but what about privacy policies and settings? Don't those mean that my account is protected? Which is a great question. So understanding the privacy policies of websites that you're using is really important as they are constantly changing. because Facebooks and sites like that are designed to sell us things in order to keep making new deals with advertisers. They change their privacy policies pretty frequently and often without any notice. Now, on the plus side, that's one of the reasons why we don't have to pay for things like Facebook or Instagram, but it does mean it makes trying to keep up with those changes pretty impractical and time consuming. So you want to think about, even in those online spaces where you're connected with people and they're connected with you and there are privacy settings, it doesn't mean that it's a perfectly secure and structured system. As an alternative, there are sites like My Lifeline or Caring Bridge, which are both social networking sites that are specifically designed to be a safe space to share updates about your cancer experience. They have much higher level of control of your environment and levels of security and privacy than the mainstream social media networks. But while the privacy policies are easier to follow, profiles still are not 100% automatically protected. So if you're going to use any of these sites, it's worth taking the time to read through the privacy policies, figure out what protections are offered by each level of security, and figure out which one is going to work best for you. In general, it's a good idea to review the privacy policies for any website where you're sharing personal information. Now, additional steps that you can take when it comes to online privacy include developing a personal disclosure plan. You want to make clear decisions about what, if any, information about your cancer journey you're going to share online and off, and where you're going to share it in terms of specific websites, blogs, etc. And as you're thinking through what's going to work best for you, it's a good idea to spend some time considering the potential long-term impact of online disclosure. So it may be the case that some of you have disclosed at work and everybody is being really supportive, and that is just an outstanding situation to be in. But the fact is, the internet doesn't go away. So it's important to think beyond right now and consider possible long-term impact, because none of us can predict the future. So you may find yourself unexpectedly looking for a job 5 years from now, or your supportive supervisor may move on and be replaced by somebody who starts Googling their new staff. Now, there's no way to know how that person is going to respond to the information that they find. So once you've made these decisions, you want to communicate them with the people in your network, whether they're your friends and your family or people that you've connected with online. And even if you've shared your preferences with your loved ones, it's still a good idea to monitor what others are posting so that you have a sense of what is out there about you. Now, there's also plenty of opportunities to take control of what comes up in your searches by taking a strategic approach to what you post online. People don't know what they don't share with them, and in a work context, social media is a forum where you can not only tell, but also show people who you are as a professional. So some tips, you want to Google yourself. You'll want to know what comes up if someone else were to Google you. That way you can stay ahead of the ball and be able to respond to anything that might come up. You also want to use social media websites strategically. You want to keep it professional and polite. You can also create a professional website or a blog. This is a great way to control your own narrative by putting out information that you want to be seen in a Google search. And you can also delete old posts. They might still be there somewhere, but you can make them harder to find. And last but not least, think strategically about what you post. We always recommend running everything through a filter of these 3 questions you can ask yourself. Would I want my boss, either current or future, or my coworkers to know this? Would I want this to be on the front page of a newspaper or the homepage of my favorite news site? And would I want my grandmother or my mother to see this? Those are all really great ways to kind of filter out what may be appropriate or not appropriate. So as we continue talking about making disclosure decisions, it's important to think about them as part of a spectrum, meaning it's not a black or white issue and there are no absolutes. So start by asking yourself how you feel about sharing the news. Some people are comfortable with the idea, others not so much, and all of that is valid. So you can also ask yourself, why is it you want to share? Is it because it feels important for you to do so? Is it necessary in order to access certain legal protections or benefits? Now, there's no right answer to this. It's all about your specific needs, preferences, and circumstances. And of course, not sharing is also often an option. And we'll talk about that in a few more slides. However, if you are planning conversations, stick to what you know to be true today. You want to avoid trying to bring what ifs into the dialogue in order to keep discussions more focused and productive. And also, sharing typically doesn't have to be an all or nothing scenario. You can always start by sharing just a little piece of information that's relevant now, and then share more down the road if or when something else becomes relevant. But once information's out there, it's hard to really unshare it. And where you are in terms of your current work circumstances may also play a role in your decision making in terms of what, when, and how you disclose. So let's say you have been at your job for 10 years and you're close with your supervisor and your coworkers. That may make you may make a different set of disclosure decisions than somebody who's, let's say, seeking work right now, or maybe just started a job and are getting to know everybody. Now, all of this is to say that different people may have different concerns about disclosure, depending on who they are and what your circumstances are. So when we introduce the idea of not disclosing in the workplace, it's very understandable that people are often confused about whether or not there's a responsibility to disclose their diagnosis or treatment plan at work. So if you're wondering whether you have to share the news of your diagnosis at work, you should know that although there can be some exceptions, in most instances, there is not an obligation nor a requirement to share your details about your health or your health history with your employer, and nor can they ask in most instances. However, people may decide to disclose for a variety of reasons. So you want to ask yourself, are there any legal benefits to disclosing? For example, you may have to share some information if you want to access a protection that you're eligible for under the law, such as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. There may also be an interpersonal benefit to disclosing. For example, some people are just sharers, so it may feel unnatural for them not to say anything. Others, of course, may feel the complete opposite, and they have zero interest in sharing and feel very strongly that medical and health information is private. The point is, evaluating how you feel about sharing this information at work is a key part of the decision-making process. Now, there may also be a practical benefit to disclosing. So, for example, someone who's been working hard to improve their performance after getting a bad review, they may want to share what's going on with their supervisor if they're concerned that they may not be able to keep up with pace due to treatment-related fatigue or other side effects. In this instance, disclosing may mean that the supervisor has context in the event that the improvement they've been seeing starts to move in the opposite direction. Now, with all of this in mind, think back to the last slide and remember that disclosure is a spectrum. In none of these three examples do you necessarily have to lay out every single detail about your diagnosis or your prognosis. So for example, someone seeking a legal protection, such as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA, which we will get to in a few slides. As I mentioned, you might have to provide some support for why you are eligible to ask for it. But that doesn't necessarily mean laying out every single detail on the table. If there's a need to divulge more information down the road, then you can be prepared to do so at that point. But there's no need to offer it up all right away. Now, part of this discussion, including figuring out how much to share and with whom, can involve considering what you know about the possible side effects that you're likely to experience, particularly if the choice has been made not to disclose, either at all or widely within your organization. So some additional considerations about whether or not to disclose at work will include, you want to think about the individual culture of your workplace. Think about the various ways that people communicate with each other at work. and that may help you decide if, how, or how much you want to share at work. When contemplating who to tell, that is going to vary a lot depending on your specific circumstances. And it's possible that you might find yourself having to have more than one disclosure conversation. So if that's the case, we recommend starting with the person that it's going to be easiest to talk to. For many people, that would be a direct supervisor because it's someone with whom they have an ongoing conversation and can be an advocate for them with higher ups. But it's also important to bear in mind that most managers aren't trained to be managers. So this may be the first time that they're having this type of conversation, and they could feel in uncharted territories themselves. It also puts the burden on the employee with cancer to help teach that manager what to do next. CAC has a manager's toolkit that we developed for this exact situation because survivors asked us for something concrete that they could take with them into these types of conversations with their supervisor or their HR department that allow them to outline what would be helpful and make them feel supported. So for some people, their supervisor is going to be out of the question, so you might want to go to HR instead. HR departments can be a font of information because they're the ones who really understand the employee handbook, and they may even have experience with other people who have been in similar circumstances. So perhaps the most important thing to disclose in any of these conversations is the idea that treatment is going to be fluid. So whoever you're talking with, help them understand that the things you're sharing are what you know to be true today, but they may not apply next week, next month, or 6 months from now. And this is likely to be an ongoing conversation. This can help your employer, your supervisor, your HR department, whoever you're talking to, understand that you intend to communicate with the most updated information that you have. And this is because the changes that bodies can go through during treatment, whether they're visible side effects like hair loss or skin changes, or invisible side effects such as cognitive changes or a decrease in energy levels. These can often disclose information even if words don't. So for those of you who are planning to or have already decided not to disclose widely, it can be a good idea to have a sense of the types of changes that you are likely to experience and whether those might be perceived by your coworkers in a way that invites questions. And from there, it's about knowing how to have prepared responses to any of those questions that might arise, so you don't accidentally share any information that you prefer to keep private. This slide has some points to consider for those of you who are working remotely who wish to avoid accidental disclosure. It's easy to develop a false sense of security when you're working from home, but in some ways, you may even need to be more hyper-aware. For example, if you're working from home and you have video meetings, your coworkers, your clients, whoever you're meeting with will be able to view your personal space. So make sure there's nothing visible in the background that you're not comfortable sharing, or you can choose to use a blurred background or a virtual background. You can see I'm using one today. Also, if you share your screen during meetings, be aware of any desktop files, pop-up notifications, etc. that might be visible. It can be a good idea to pause those before the meeting starts. And if you check your personal email or you log into any other personal accounts on a work device, we recommend that you sign out at the end of every day and set up two-factor authentication to ensure that you're notified if anyone other than you tries to sign in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, disclosure is also an important aspect to consider when it comes to the job search. A lot of people ask us if they should include their cancer experience in their resume or their cover letter, either as a positive or as an explanation of some sort. Our first response is always do whatever you're comfortable with. But think about this. The goal of a cover letter and a resume are to get you an interview based on your skills and your potential. So in that sense, your diagnosis and your treatment aren't really part of that conversation. Another thing to consider is the fact that disclosing in a letter is not going to be a dynamic exchange. And by that, I mean, you won't physically be there when the employer initially absorbs that information. So you won't have the opportunity to explain anything or answer any questions that may have to steer them back to questions about your skills. So the bottom line is nobody tells everything about everything during a job interview or even once they're hired. However, even if you are 100% sure that you want to disclose during the hiring process, the cover letter and the resume probably are not the best way to do that. If you do feel that it's important to let your employer know about your health history before you accept a job, and we have met many, many people for who that was very important for them, we typically recommend that you wait until later in the hiring process. This way, everyone involved in the hiring process has a chance to spend time with you and get a sense of who you are as a person and as a potential employee, instead of just reading that information in your cover letter and potentially putting it immediately into a no pile. And of course, remember that you are never required to share this information. With that said, it's common for those with a diagnosis to get caught up in the disclosure piece when it comes to voluntary questions on applications. Many organizations are asking these questions to get better senses of candidates as they work to improve the diversity of their staff. These questions are supposed to be optional, and for the most part, they are. This means that it is entirely up to you how and if you want to answer these demographic questions. If you decide that you don't want to share this information, which again is well within your right to choose, it's often a good idea to select prefer not to answer for all of the demographic questions. Otherwise, it may seem like a red flag if the disability question was the only one that you chose not to answer. So now I'd like to jump over to discuss side effects. The most common that we hear about is chemo brain or brain fog. This type of fog can come about whether or not you've received chemotherapy or not. And while unfortunately there is no magic bullet solution, one piece of advice that we give is to let go of the idea of multitasking, because studies show that only 2% of people multitask effectively. So to combat this, we recommend going back to basics. You want to write down a list of priorities, then turn off your phone or your email notifications so they don't cause a distraction, and focus on one thing at a time. Writing down everything is a great practice to get into, so you always have a record and you don't have to rely on your memory as much. And try to keep a single notebook with all of your to-do things in one place. It's much easier to keep track of that one notebook that you can bring into a meeting so you don't wind up with your grocery list instead of your talking points. And additionally, it's a good idea to take time to rehearse everything, from presentations to project updates, even some phone calls. If you work in an office type environment that has a shared calendar, you may want to schedule time for yourself on that calendar so people know that you're busy. And simple stress relief practices can also go a really long way to help improve your focus. Deep breathing exercises, or even 2 to 3 minutes of meditation can be easily done at your desk or while taking a walk. And a little bit can really go a long way in terms of helping to hit that reset button. Now, it's also helpful to take some time to think about how to communicate with your supervisors and your coworkers around your challenging needs. Ask for priorities, create a written plan, know your limits, and set boundaries. It's important to remember that the way that we communicate at work is different than how we communicate at home. So despite being exhausted, it's important to still communicate in a professional manner. What can help with this is using what we call the professional no's. That can sound something like this. Let's say your employer gives you a new project that you know you're not going to be able to complete. You can say something like, I appreciate that you thought of me for this project, but I'm a little swamped this week, and I'm concerned about my ability to get this back to you in a timely manner. Or you may be offered extra hours to work, but your energy levels are too low. So you can reply by saying, thank you for offering me these additional shifts. Unfortunately, I'm short on time at the moment, and I've got some family obligations to attend to. But I'd love to talk about the possibility again in a few months, once that situation at home is comfortable for you, in the event that you're put on the spot and you may need to set some clear boundaries. You can also learn more about this. We have a two-part Communicating Effectively webinar. The first part is next month on August 7th, and the second part will be the following month on September 11th. If you're not already registered, you can do so on our website, and there's a link at the end of the slides for that as well. So while we're thinking about how to respond during specific conversations that may happen in the workplace, I want to also tell you about a conversation technique that we call the swivel. So just like the professional no, it's a verbal formula or pattern, but this is used in response to a cancer-related comment that may be made by one of these well-intended colleagues that we've been talking about. And it involves acknowledging the cancer-related comment, putting an and in the middle of it, and then swiveling the conversation back around to a topic that's more work-oriented. So for example, let's say a coworker comes up to you and says, you know, my uncle had cancer. You can respond by saying, I'm so sorry to hear that. That must have been really hard. And while I have you, what did you think about that meeting yesterday? Being able to shift that conversation back to a place where you feel comfortable can be really empowering. And it indicates to your colleagues that you're still a whole, vibrant person with lots of contributions to make. So now let's talk about managing side effects at work. One tool is to use reasonable accommodations, which I mentioned earlier are a benefit of the ADA for those who qualify. Basically, these are tools that can be used to make working through treatment or returning to work after treatment more manageable. Now, before we move on, just a note that there's a lot of information out there on what reasonable accommodations are, how to use them, and how they can be really valuable when thinking through these issues in real time. For this information, you can check our website, or another helpful place to look is askjan.org, which is the homepage of the Job Accommodation Network. They have a great resource of different accommodations and different scenarios that may help you brainstorm and come up with ideas. And of course, it's always helpful to ask a legal expert for guidance with questions about your specific circumstances. Now, one type of accommodation that might be made is in the workplace, which meaning the actual environmental challenges that exist at work. And I'll walk you through some examples of how to use these reasonable accommodations on the next slides. So our first example is a woman that we met at CAC a few years back. She's a social worker who truly loved her job, and work was a big part of how she was coping with her treatment. However, she found herself becoming incredibly nauseous when she was at work. Now, of course, that's not an unusual side effect of treatment, but what was unusual was the fact that she did not feel nauseous when she was at home in the evenings, and she didn't feel nauseous on the weekends. It was just during work hours. So we went back and forth with her asking questions and eventually discovered that her office was located right outside of the cafeteria, which meant the smell of cooking food kept wafting in, and that is what was making her feel unwell. So for her, the reasonable accommodation was to switch offices to be away from those smells. It didn't make working through treatment completely a breeze, but it did lessen that one side effect so that she could focus better. Our next example is a gentleman named Frank, who was struggling with fatigue as a result of his treatment. He worked in the finance and operations team at his company, and his job required him to print and scan a lot of documents throughout the day. And to do so, he had to walk up and down 2 flights of stairs to get to the room with all of the equipment in it. But as his treatment progressed, his fatigue got worse, and eventually it made going up and down those stairs all day nearly impossible. So for him, the reasonable accommodation was to get a combination printer scanner that could live next to his desk and allowed him to preserve his energy for work itself. Now, when we compare these two examples, you can see that there's no one size fits all when it comes to reasonable accommodations. It's about looking at your specific job, the specific side effect, and the specific challenge to identify solutions that are creative and logical. There's also a number of questions that you can ask yourself to identify other potential accommodations. So for example, can you work a full-time but flexible schedule? This would mean you ultimately work the same number of hours, they would just be distributed differently. So varying the start and end times of the workday to maximize the hours that you're feeling best can be a huge help. So a 9 to 5 day might become a 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. day. Or if you need to take time out during the workday to go to appointments, you can make up the time by working later in that day or later that week. And if your job includes allocated break times, is it possible to take more frequent or additional breaks? So let's say your schedule entitles you to 2 breaks and a 45-minute lunch, but what you really need is a total of 4 breaks in your day. Those extra breaks could be potentially considered a reasonable accommodation. And again, these are just meant to help you start thinking about accommodations and also to remove some of the myths around the concept, such as accommodations are expensive or are unlikely to be approved. The fact is, according to the Job Accommodation Network, most accommodations cost nothing at all or cost an employer $300 or less. So be resourceful and really think about your environment and what might be causing the specific challenge that you are experiencing. And remember, it's all fluid. What could make work easier today could be different tomorrow. And this isn't a one-time only opportunity. Now, not everyone will continue with the same job that they held prior to their diagnosis. Some people experience a physical change during treatment that might make it impossible to do the same job. Some people might have a change of heart and decide that they want to spend time doing something different or follow a dream that they once had. Or some people just want to shake things up and try something new. Regardless of the reason, it's very common for someone to be looking for work during or after a cancer treatment. So thinking through the job search process itself, it's no secret that there are many challenges and unknowns involved. And it can be kind of scary in particular to start thinking about our during this challenging time, things might seem impossible to do. So to start, remember that looking for a job is a process that can take time. And while it might not feel this way right now, it's important to think about what you want, not just what you need, and then come up with a strategic approach. The job hunt also comes with huge ups and downs that need to be managed, and social workers can be incredibly helpful in figuring out how to manage the emotional roller coaster effectively. We've noticed over the years that people in the cancer community tend to hold themselves to a higher standard than others who are looking for work. And like I said earlier, often survivors feel obligated to share more about their health history than they have to or they should. So we like to say that job search is like building any relationship. It's all about the timing. With various steps involved, the process builds upon itself and can be heavily focused on a great first impression. So in this case, that would be your resume, your cover letter, your LinkedIn profile, etc. And if we use dating as an example of relationship building, the first text conversation with a potential date is going to have a different feel to it than a marriage proposal. So if someone shows up on a first date and is an open book, sharing all of your idiosyncrasies and quirks immediately, that is going to read differently than if that same information comes up 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years into a relationship. So in that same way, you're not going to go on a first job interview and admit that you chew gum really loudly, or that you always sign into Zoom meetings a couple minutes late. So I encourage you to keep in mind that it's important to behave appropriately in the context of which stage you're at in the job search process. And projecting appropriate confidence and control is a great way to do that. Finally, during this time where so much can feel and is out of control, there are elements of job search that you can focus on right now that are completely within your control. Things like working on your resume, perfecting your cover letter, and getting in the habit of networking. Now, networking is one of the earliest parts of the job search process. And according to one of our career coaches, currently 85% of jobs are found through other people versus job boards, headhunters, ads, etc. So it goes without saying that networking is a necessary part of the job hunting process. I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of networking because it feels like asking for a favor, which can feel especially challenging if you've been out of the game for a while due to treatment and recovery. But the fact is that basically anyone you know can be a source for networking. And there are great online resources for this too, such as LinkedIn, which I imagine most of you are familiar with. It's like Facebook, but for professionals. LinkedIn has become a go-to source for employers looking to hire. According to a recent study, 87% of recruiters reported that LinkedIn is the most effective tool when vetting during the job search process. Given that it is being used so much to find talent, you want to make sure that you're utilizing it to the fullest potential by writing a compelling profile, asking for strategic and substantive recommendations, and posting professional updates. This slide breaks down some of the best practices for networking into key do's and don'ts. Now, unfortunately, many people tend to be uncomfortable with the idea of networking, either because they don't know how to go about doing it, or they don't like to ask for help. And it's important to keep in mind that most people are willing to help if you're able to articulate exactly what you need and approach networking as a reciprocal process. So just getting the word out that you are looking is more than half the battle. Now, just as important as networking, LinkedIn and your overall online presence are for job searching, they do not replace the time-tested tools of job hunting, starting with the resume. It's likely that I'm not telling you something you don't already know, but let's quickly review some tips on how to write a good resume. An effective resume is one that is written with a particular audience in mind. It's professional, it's easy to read, and it has impact. It summarizes your accomplishments succinctly rather than being an exhaustive list of everything that you've ever done work-wise. A good rule of thumb is 1 page for early career professionals, 2 pages for somebody who's a little more seasoned. Lastly, a compelling resume must be future-focused and targeted towards your career goal. Now, more and more companies are using software called applicant tracking systems, or ATS, to scan resumes that are submitted. They do this to weed out those who are not immediately qualified based on their resume, but it can also be an obstacle to get your application through when applying for jobs. So it's a good idea to go through the job description and identify any keywords that you can include in your resume that may then be picked up by the ATS software. And we also offer a keyword sample guide on our website to help you draft an effective resume. You can see it on this slide, and there's a link on here as well to download it. This might be a little small to read all of those keywords here. Putting this type of effort in really does help increase your chances of having your resume reviewed by a human being, though, and it's really worth the time and energy. Now, in addition to the resume, the cover letter or the cover email is vitally important to the hiring process as well. Along with your resume, it helps you get in the door. Now, what's key to know about a cover letter is that it should be tailored to the specific job that you're applying for. It's also important to make sure that a cover letter isn't simply regurgitating your resume. Rather, it's an opportunity to draw parallels or highlight an experience that makes you uniquely suited for this role. A cover letter is also your first opportunity to show a potential employer how you write and how you communicate. You also want to make connections between your specific skill set and experiences to the specific job and company offering the position. And finally, and I can't stress this enough, it's extremely important that your cover letters are carefully proofread before they are sent. Now, if you're applying to a bunch of different jobs all at once, it can be tempting to copy and paste the company name in or role into a generic letter. But if you accidentally leave a different company name in there, it's going to look sloppy and can negate any claims of being organized or detail-oriented. So moving on to interviews, in thinking about how to prepare for interviews, remember that what's most important to a prospective employer is how the applicant can solve their problems and meet their needs. So be prepared to speak about that. You want to tell stories about how you've solved problems at past jobs and use specific examples. Also, don't be afraid to make this exchange conversational. One of the things that hiring managers are assessing is personal fit, so don't shy away from back and forth exchanges. Let's say a interviewer asks you a question that you're not quite sure how to answer. Don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions and ensure that you respond with the answer that they're looking for. We are also often asked advice on how to address resume gaps. When asked about a resume gap, putting a positive spin on the situation can really help to put the recruiter or the interviewer at ease and confirm that the gap doesn't have to do with anything negative, like a bad work ethic or laziness. And since it's possible and totally reasonable that you will be asked about a gap on your resume, it's a good idea to be prepared with responses. If it comes up, you want to be future focused, non-specific, and brief. This slide has a couple useful swivel examples that might be used in an interview situation. And again, spend some time figuring out language that works and feels right for you. So you'll be ready if somebody says, I see you have a gap on your resume. Can you tell me about that? Of course, we want the answer to acknowledge the question and then swivel the interviewer's attention back to the job in question, the desire to get hired, and also the skill set that you have on the table. Questions about resume gaps are not necessarily the only topics that may cause stress or anxiety during an interview. So here are a few additional examples of how to use the swivel that can help decrease the chance of accidental disclosure. Obviously, there are very specific examples, but keep in mind one of the best things that you can do for an interview is practice. We often feel people rolling their eyes when we recommend role playing to prepare for interviews. I know it's not my most comfortable thing to do personally, but it can be really helpful to have a trusted loved one pose some questions that you can foresee causing some trouble. That way your response can be practiced ahead of time and out loud. By actually speaking those words, it's a great way to get more comfortable and confident when it's time for your interview. And one of the upsides of living in the technological age that we are in right now is that Google can be used to research a prospective employer, and it should be. You want to try to find out as much as possible about the company before any meetings happen. Obviously, knowing about the company is going to help you sound informed in the interview, but it's also smart to spend some time thinking about whether the company is going to be a good fit for your needs. If your interview is the result of having networked with somebody on staff there, then you probably already have a sense of what it's like to work at the organization. But you'll still want to have search for additional information. In other words, you want to do some fact finding beyond the conversations that might happen as part of the interview process. So things like researching a employer's benefits packages and their health insurance, which you might be able to do on Glassdoor. That might be important to somebody who is still in treatment or post-treatment who are worried about health insurance and what your needs might be. So that in addition to knowing who you're talking to and what the company does and all of that kind of stuff, that's great to be able to address in a formal interview itself. And clearly the goal of any job any job search is to find a new role. One of the best things about starting a new job with any employer is a fresh start. According to our coaches, research shows that it's your first 90 days in a new job are the make it or break it time for a success. This is the time that you're assimilating, managing your energy, meeting new people, learning the culture of your new work environment, and develop those relationships. Remember that there's no need to work a million hours to create a good first impression. Focus instead on creating a simple plan for the things that I just mentioned and break down everything into small pieces when it feels overwhelming. And it's important to learn and understand what it means to be successful at a new company. And remember that every company is dysfunctional in one way or another. It's important to make sure that ongoing self-care is also part of the picture, both physically and mentally. And remember, people don't get hired in the hopes that they'll fail. They get hired in the hopes that they will succeed. So finding the right person for a job is time-consuming and costly. So most new employers are going to want to do everything possible to support your successful transition into a new job. And that can be a very helpful thing to keep in mind on days where challenges feel like they may be outweighing the excitement of that new opportunity. So that is the end here. I'm going to have Nicole jump back on for a minute, and then we'll get into Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Now, before we move on to Q&A, I do just want to share some additional resources on our website that might be helpful, some of which were mentioned throughout the presentation and some which may be a little bit newer. So please feel free to take advantage of those as you see fit. And here are some additional resources outside of CAC that might be helpful, particularly in the legal realm, since as we have mentioned, we are not a legal organization, but we do encourage everyone to seek out legal information when appropriate. And then there are also some upcoming virtual events, a couple of webinars still to come this year. Next month, we start our two-part Communicating Effectively series, which is on August 7th, and part 2 is on September 11th, of which I will be presenting those. And after that, we have Setting Boundaries, which is on October 9th, which is always a really great session where I learn a lot. You can find a full list of our remaining webinars for the year on our website, and you can feel free to register for as many or as few as you'd like. Also, registration has just opened for our West Coast Conference, which will be coming up on Saturday, October 19th. So this is an all-day event that takes place on Zoom, and we have a really great lineup of speakers to cover everything from working through treatment to making disclosure decisions to job search. Again, registration is free and can be found on the link at this slide. If you have any follow-up questions for today, Scott's email is on this slide, or you can email cancerandcareers@cew.org. We do hope to connect with you all on social media. All of our handles are listed, and we also have our bi-monthly newsletter and our website if you are interested in signing up for those. And finally, here are the continuing education requirements. Again, we'll leave this up here while we move into the Q&A, just so anyone who may have missed it earlier in the presentation has a chance to see it. And with that, let's move on to some questions. I saw a couple coming in through the Q&A box, which everyone used correctly throughout, so thank you. Are you ready to get started, Scott? We have a couple minutes for some.
Let's go.
Okay. This one is from Kathy. What are we required to disclose on an application when the question is, do you have a disability and cancer is on the list?
That's a great question. I would see if it's, first of all, it depends on what your comfort zone is and how how widely you want to disclose your diagnosis. If you don't want to disclose your diagnosis, I would say see if that question's optional to answer. And like we said earlier, if it is optional, you probably want to do like prefer not to answer or whatever the option is for all of those kinds of questions, because it might raise a red flag if you fill out your race and ethnicity and that kind of stuff, but don't fill out the disability question.
They're voluntary. It's really just a way for the company to get a sense of who's applying, but it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Well, you want to make sure that it's not a required question, but typically it is optional. Someone else has asked, I'm wondering if you can share examples of reasonable accommodations for those who have chemo brain.
Sure. Putting me on the spot. I mean, we talked a lot.
I could throw some out there.
Yeah, I would love to.
Obviously some of the challenges with chemo brain are fatigue and a lack of focus, maybe dragging a little bit. So, adding in extra breaks throughout your day can be really helpful. Readjusting your schedule to when you do feel the clearest. So perhaps, as was mentioned, some ideas, starting your day maybe earlier and ending it earlier, or starting it later and ending it later, just whatever the time of day that feels best for you is really maximizing it. Perhaps You could get some speak to type software if you're feeling like you're a little jumbled and it's easier for you to just say things out loud. Ask Jan is a really great organization to check out because they actually have a listing of symptoms that one might be experiencing, and then they make suggestions based on those symptoms of what possible accommodations could be. So it really, even if they don't identify something specifically that would work for you, they might kind of get your wheels turning in terms of what could work for whatever symptom you are experiencing. And chemo brain cognitive functioning is definitely one that is cited a lot. So
Yeah.
I would definitely check them out.
I think it also like remote work might be an option, even if it's like a day a week that you can maybe take a nap during a lunch break or something. Things have definitely changed a lot in the past 4 or 5 years around remote work. Even if you're back in an office, it might be something you can bring up as well.
For sure. Do you think we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think we can do one more. If we don't get to your questions, you can send us an email at cancerandcareers.cw.org, and we'll get an answer for you if we don't get to you today.
This one's from Amy. Any advice on getting an ADA work from home accommodation approved due to cancer treatments? While I have my ADA and FML paperwork in my office, it's classified as essential, although all but one element of the job can be done at home and was during the pandemic. Is there advice that the company may only accommodate for a short, I think maybe time, yet, but the weekly chemo treatments may last longer than 3 months?
I mean, you could discuss if that one responsibility could be passed along to somebody else. That would probably be my first instinct there. Or if it's something that maybe can be done on Mondays and then working from home Tuesday through Friday or something like that. If there's a way to arrange that, not knowing exactly what the specific task that is holding this up. But it's worth having a conversation, even if you don't qualify for the ADA, it's still worth asking these questions because the worst thing that happens is somebody says no. And a lot of people are going to be encouraging and want to have you do the best job that you can do. So it really can't hurt to just ask and be creative about, how to change things up. And maybe you can take, like if I gave a project to Nicole and maybe I could take a project from Nicole back from her to make up for it, that's easier to do at home or something like that.
Yeah,
Any
for sure.
other
I think,
ideas?
the only definite no is the question not asked. So
Yeah.
it's always worth approaching it. It's also a really good idea to approach them with, solution focused ideas. So kind of taking the time to sit down and think about what their concerns may be, and then having on hand, some ways to mitigate what those concerns would be. Obviously, if you did your job well during the pandemic from home, you cite that, you say exactly what maybe accomplishments you had during that time, things like that. Just to really drive home the point that just because they want you in the office isn't necessarily a good enough reason that you have to be there. So it's just worth always exploring and being, as we've said throughout the presentation today, just being as prepared and informed as possible when you are approaching employers with requests and asks of them.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should probably let everybody go. So I'll leave it to you, Scott, to close us out.
Just thank you all for coming, and we hope we'll see you again maybe next month, maybe in a few months. But again, if we didn't get your question, cancerandcareers@cew.org is our email. We have people monitoring that throughout the week. So we will get you an individual response if we couldn't get to you today. Thank you so much.